In this video, I'm gonna talk about the object origin, transform orientation, and transform pivot point. Every time I select on any object, you see an orange point, and this orange point is object origin. And what it does is saving the location, rotation, and scale of your object. And for this sphere, you can see that the location is -4. And if I look at the top of the object, you can see that at the x-axis is -4. And for this cube, all the location is 0, 0, 0. You can change the object origin of any object without changing the location of the real object by going to the option, origin, and then you can use the move tools for changing the origin of the object without changing the real object. And also you can use the rotation for the rotation and scale for the scale. And you can see that although I changed the scale of the object origin and the value here is changing, but the real object is not gonna be changed. Let me use the Ctrl Z to back to the previous and deactivate the origin. You can also change the object origin with going to the object, set origin, and using the geometry to origin. And let me first change the origin of this sphere to, for example, here. And if I select object, set origin, geometry to origin, it's gonna be put the center of the real object at the object origin. And if I use the set origin, geometry to origin, you can see that my sphere is gonna be go to the origin. But if I select the second option, origin to geometry, it's gonna put the object origin at the center of the real object. Okay. And the third option is origin to 3D cursor, and it's gonna put the object origin at the 3D cursor. And if I select set origin to 3D cursor, it's gonna put it at the 3D cursor. And also the fourth and fifth option is gonna put the origin to center of the mass, but the difference is that the way it calculates the center of the mass. For surface is gonna be calculated based on the surface, and for the volume is gonna be calculated based on the volume. And most of the time they are actually the same. There is also another way to control the object origin by activating the add-on called point menu. If you go to the edit, preference, select search pi, and activate the 3D viewport pi menu, you can use the Ctrl Alt X for origin to geometry, origin to cursor, geometry to origin, and origin to center of mass. You have two other options, origin to bottom and origin to selection. If I select origin to bottom, it's gonna put the object origin at the bottom of the object. But for origin to selection, I need to go to the edit mode. And if I go to the edit mode, and let me deactivate this origin and go to the edit mode, if I want to rotate my cube around this vertex, for example, okay, I can change the object origin to this selected vertex by using Ctrl Alt X and origin to selected. But remember, you need to activate the pi menu add-ons. And if I select origin to selected, the object origin is gonna be at this point. And then you can also back it to the center by origin to center of mass. That's for object origin. And every time you select on any object, you see this arrow, and the orientation of this arrow is based on the 3D viewport, as you can see. And this is what we call global orientation because it's based on the 3D viewport. But sometimes you may need to change this orientation based on, for example, your object origin, not the 3D viewport. And for changing that, you can go to the here global and change it to local, and local is gonna be follow the orientation of your object origin. And as you can see, if I go to the local, the arrow isn't gonna change because the rotation of the object origin is the same. But if I change the option origin and rotate my object origin, for example, this much, if I deactivate the origin, you can see that now the orientation of this arrow is, for example, on this angle, and it follows on the object origin. But if I change the local to global, it's gonna be back to the 3D viewport. So global for 3D viewport and local for object origin. The next option is normal, and for normal it's better to go to the edit mode. And if I select on this face, you can see that the z-axis is to the top, and in normal the z-axis is always gonna be perpendicular to the face or element that you select. And if I select this face, you can see that the z-axis, the blue color, is also here perpendicular to the face, and also in here. Okay. The next option is gimbal, and gimbal is for animator. We're not gonna talking about it. And the view is based on the angle that I look at the object. For example, if I look at object from this angle, you can see that this arrow is always gonna be follow on my orientation of the object. And if the z-axis of the view is always gonna be toward me. So if I, for example, use G and then press Z, we can see that this vertex is gonna become close or become far away from me. Okay, it's not really useful that much, but I'm gonna say it. And the 3D cursor is gonna be follow the orientation of 3D cursor. And if I, for example, select this one and activate the move and go to the cursor, you can see that it's the same as global. But if I go to the sidebar view, in here you can change the location and rotation of the 3D cursor. And if I change the rotation of the 3D cursor, you can see that this orientation is gonna follow on this 3D cursor. But most of the time you either use the global or local. And the parent is for rigging, and it's not really for modeling, so I'm not gonna talking about it. So let me back to the global and hide the sidebar. And beside the transform orientation, we also have transform pivot point. The transform pivot point is gonna be the method to measure the origin of the rotation. For example, whenever you select multiple objects, for example, if I rotate this cube, you can see that the orientation is gonna be at this object origin. But if I select two objects and use rotate, you can see that the pivot of my rotation is gonna be at the average location of these two object origin. Okay, and let me go to the edit mode. And for example, if I select box, if I select these 6 faces and use the rotation, it's gonna be at the center of these faces, because what I select is bounding box, and bounding box is always gonna create a box. For example, if I select this face, it's gonna create a virtual bounding box around this selection. Okay, and then put the pivot at the center of this bounding box. Okay, it's a technical method, so we don't really need to worry about it. The other option is 3D cursor, and if you put a 3D cursor, the pivot is gonna be 3D cursor, and you can see that when I rotate, it's gonna be rotate around 3D cursor. The next option is individual origin. Individual origin is gonna be really important because sometimes you need to rotate each object separately, and for example these 6 faces is alone is gonna be one group of object, and this 8 face is gonna be one group of object. And if I use the rotate, you can see that each one of them is gonna be rotate separate. Okay, but if I select this 3 face and connect these 2 group of faces, you can see that now all the faces is gonna be presume one group of object and rotate around the center of them. But if I deactivate it one more time, pivot of each one of this group is gonna be at the center of each one of them. Okay, and the median point is gonna be the average point between the average pivot point of this group and the average pivot point of this group. For example, if I say the average center of this 6 face is, for example, here, and the average pivot point of these 8 faces is here, it's gonna be connect these two and put, for example, the center at here. And if I select middle point and now use the rotation, you can see that the pivot point is here, and it's most of the time close to the bounding box. And the last element is active element, and let me delete this one and select, for example, this face. And every time you deselect an element and select element again, you can see that it becomes white, and this is what we call the active element. Every time a selected element is white, it becomes active. And if I now change it to active element and use the rotation, the pivot point is gonna be at the center of the active element, and you can see that it's gonna be at the center of the active element. And it's mostly useful in vertex mode because you can deselect a vertex and select the vertex again, and now if I use the rotate, it's gonna be rotate around the active vertex that I select. And this is the object origin, transform orientation, and transform pivot point. Explaining this video was a little challenge for me, and I hope that you learn what I try to teach you about object origin and orientation in 3D world. And one more time, I want to say that object origin is the center of our object, and it's different from the center of the 3D world. And the location of the object origin is gonna be based on the center of the 3D world, but the location of the vertex of your object is gonna be based on the object origin. So the vertex of your object are gonna follow your object origin, and the object origin is gonna be based on the center of the 3D viewport. And as always, you can leave me a comment and say this video wasn't helpful at all, or you can say that it was somewhat helpful. And I will see you in the next video.